Hi, welcome to Smith and Grezzy. We've got the one and only Phil Goodwin, who is a legend of CWS Manchester and Dyke and Delph band. Welcome, Phil, from me and Sandy. We just sort of get you along because we both know you very well, but we thought we'd let the wider world discover what you're all about.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, as I say, we go back a long way, and we've had lots of great memories together. So it's strange, really, looking back. After all this time, it sort of focuses you a little bit as to where it all began. And for me, it started down in Stoke-on-Trent, where I was born, and my school, which was Blurton High School, and that was my first band. And that band was conducted by a chap called Stuart Johnson, who was ahead of his time.
I remember Stuart. I remember him.
Sorry for interrupting straight away, but is that the Stuart Johnson who I remember from? He wrote a lot of sort of beginner type band music and all that stuff.
Absolutely, Ceramic City, Suite,
very talented guy, wasn't he?
Absolutely, and as I say, obviously at the time you don't realise what's going on and how lucky you are to have someone like that. And he was the guy who really set me off. And it was that introduction. Strangely, when I went to the school, my first instrument was violin. But that didn't last too long. And then you actually had to audition for the school band. It seems, and it really was. And I really wanted to be in there, but you had to go along. You had to do oral tests. You had to sing stuff back, and I got into that. And Stuart was a big influence. And originally, by the way, I got a baritone. I had the baritone.
No!
all these secrets are coming out now. I tell you. And, so I only had it for about a week, and then I was off school. I had to go in the hospital, and when I come back, somebody had nicked the baritone. The only thing that left was an E-flat bass, and that's how it started.
Isn't it strange?
So you've really, apart from that week, just played E-flat bass, tuba all your life then?
Absolutely. I will let you into another fact later on about another instrument that featured, but quite prominently, So it was Stuart really who got me into the band, and there wasn't a great deal of banding activity around where I was, but he got me to audition for the National Youth Brass Band, and again that was a fantastic opportunity, and it really, really opened my eyes and ears, of course, and to what bands could sound like, and that was that really did set me on the path, I think.
It's funny, Bill. It's funny because the National Youth Band was the catalyst for me realising, actually, there's another level here, and you can reach it.
And that's what it was. I'd never ever experienced anything like it, and from that, I think the interest came, and also the other thing that Stuart got me into, and leads on to another part of the career, of course, and that was playing with the local symphony orchestra. And and so there's lots of circles that come together in the sort of story. But I was only about 14, I guess, 13, 14. And he said, they needed a tuba player. He was playing trombone in the orchestra. And so we went along. And the other problem is, of course, I didn't read bass clef. Mm-hmm. And so he said, it's no problem. All you've got to do is add 3 sharps.
I remember you telling me this trick.
yeah. And it's great if you've got flat keys. It's no good when you get a load of sharps. And so that led to a lot of confusion when you suddenly get an F double sharp, or what you think is an F double sharp, and then you've got to add another one to it. And an F triple sharp is nothing like an F. But that was where it really started. And from that, with the National Youth Band, and great influences there. Geoffrey Brand at that time was the music director, and again all the guest conductors that came along, people like Eric Ball, for example. It's working with Eric Ball. It just phenomenal looking back. I mean, we look at his music now, but to actually think that, and again later on, Eric Ball had a big association with the CWS band, and we used to go down to Crewkerne and places like that, and he would turn up there all the time. So there's all these little circles that eventually come together.
So when you left school, Phil, did you make a decision to study music? I seem to remember you telling me you went to what is now the Royal Northern.
Yeah, and again, this is how things work out, isn't it? Strange. So playing in that North Staffordshire Symphony Orchestra, they would very often bring in professional players from the BBC and the Halle and so on. And one of these concerts, a bass trombone player sat next to a guy called Nev Roberts.
Nev Roberts,
absolute legend. Anyway, I was sort of lower six at that point, I guess. And he said to me, what are you going to do? And I'd really no idea what I was going to do. I was doing A-levels at school, but I didn't really know what I was going to do. And he said, you make a good sound. You should come and see my mate, which was Stuart Roebuck, of course, up at the Halle.
The legendary Stuart Roebuck.
Absolutely. I mean, God, there were so many people passed through his hands.
Yeah.
And so it was from that. And I had this mad idea, and I sort of wrote off and applied to the Royal Manchester College in Manchester, as it was then, and the Royal Academy down in London. Went up to Manchester. Auditioning is a completely different process than it is now. So I went in and saw Stuart. He scared me to death. You have to write down these pieces you've played, And I'd written quite boldly this Andante by this Russian guy, Cherubini, and this was my star piece. And I said, "What?" He said, "What are you going to play?" And I said, "I'm going to play it." "I hate that." He said,
"Oh God."
I don't want to hear that. And then I thought, doing this. And then he sat down here, he says you play the Vaughan Williams Tuba Concerto. And I said, right, play me the first movement. So I had to explain to him, stupidly. I said, after the first few bars, it goes down to a pedal. I called it an E, but it's a concert G. He said, I said, I've only got 3 vowels. "I know that," he said. So this wasn't going well at all. So anyway, we got through a bit of that. Then he said, "Give me your instrument." And so he picked this instrument up and played about 3 octaves higher than I could and 2 octaves lower. And he said, "The instrument's rubbish. You start with me in September." And that was it.
Wow.
Wow.
But I also, going back to what I said earlier, the other instrument that I'd always been playing was recorder. And of course, we all think that recorder's like a, school kid's instrument. But I actually auditioned to play, I've been doing some Baroque stuff on recorder. And I auditioned that, and I got into the college on tuba and recorder. But when I got there, they said you can't do 2 wind instruments, so I had to revert to my 3rd study, which preferably for me would have been my 5th study, and that was piano. So,
it's all coming out tonight.
I tell you, all these secrets, and it's strange, as you said when we set off on this chat, it just reminds you of certain things. But of course, from that, the Nev Roberts thing comes to fruition later on, but it was never really got me into that. But at the same time, within that orchestra, a guy knew the bandmaster at the CWS Manchester band, a guy then called Tommy White. And he wrote to the band and said, "This lad's coming up, and if you've got a vacancy, you might want to have a listen to him."
Okay.
And so I then got a letter. It was all letters in those days, and it was from Derek Garside. And Derek said, "Right, come up and have an audition." And I've said this before. I went and met Derek, and we went to the old band room in Manchester by the old Co-op tobacco factory. And we it's probably the most uncomfortable hour and a half, 2 hours of my life ever, uh, because he was putting stuff in front of me that I couldn't play. I'd not seen it yet. It was looking back, it was a sort of standard, what we call now standard test pieces and concert items. So at the end of that, he said, "Well, you're not really good enough, but at college have taken you on, so they must have seen something. So we'll take a chance on you, and you're going to join." And stayed on and sat there. And next thing I know, I'm in the rehearsal, and Alex Mortimer comes in, and it was Alex who was taking the band then. And so it again, just different times, but what a fantastic opportunity, and again, fantastic grounding for me.
When was that about, Phil? Was it, what's the year we talking?
70, I joined the band in 1972. I auditioned in 71. And strangely, of course, in 72, there was a big tour to American Canada with Co-op, Dyke, Rhinetop, was it as well? No, Ferris. It's actually Ferris. And Doug said to me, "Well, we'll sign you on. And if anybody drops out, you can come with us." But I never got on that tour. Nobody dropped out. But yeah. So that was 1972.
So what sort of characters were there in Co-op at the time? Because Co-op was obviously a name I was brought up with as well as a youngster. They were, there was Dyke, Fairies, Fodens, Co-op, Modern Feltons or GUS and all that. So they were a huge name.
Absolutely. And of course they had, some of the players that have gone through that panel, we talk about Derek, Derek was an absolutely phenomenal cornet player. I'd never heard anything like it. And of course, Alex Mortimer himself, I just didn't know what to expect from him. Mm-hmm. But he was, again, an incredible musician. And unfortunately, health-wise, wasn't so good for him. But he was a real character. He could be awkward. And, there was times when he would do things that you wouldn't get away with these days. But, if you were, he could in the band room, his office was the first room, and he could see people coming down the street to band. And I remember once, there's a guy who was not a young guy. Funny enough, he played Modern Feltons, cornet player, called Lynn Williams. And Lynn's bus had been late, and he was coming down the street. And Alex suddenly came in, started rehearsal, and poor Lynn had to stand at the back there for about 20 minutes. And then Alex turned up, oh, you decided to join us, have you? This sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing that was strange at that time, I seem to remember, on the music stands were ashtrays, because people smoked. In the band room. And it's strange looking back at, like I say, how things and times change. But yeah, there were some incredible characters there. One I have to mention, and Simon, you'll definitely know this guy, a legendary B-flat bass player called Joe Poole.
Pedal Joe Poole. I've heard a lot of stories about Joe.
Well, I sat next to Joe when I first joined the band, and we did cross swords, I have to say, on occasion. He saw me as this young, whippersnapper coming in, thinking he knew it all. And going back to things that you can never get away with now. So at that time, people, the younger ones, our hair tended to be a bit longer. And if Joe thought that your hair was a bit long, and he'd say, "Right, I want you 15 minutes before early next rehearsal," and he sat you down in one of the other rooms in like this barber's chair and cut your hair. He trimmed it.
Wow!
And then he actually charged you for it, as well.
Really?
The pets, So people like that, and the other great influence for me, I think, at the club at that time I mean, there were some, as I say, legendary players went through there. Obviously, you've got Brian Evans through there, Lyndon Baglin. All those sort of people that were absolute, mega stars. But the guy who came and sat next to me for like a little while was Harold Lang, and Harold had been in the band for a while and he'd gone away, but he was on some of the legendary performances, the winning performances that Delph played. And he taught me a lot, not in a shouty way, nothing like that. Very, very encouraging. And there's one other Alex story as well that when Besson introduced the first wide 19-inch bell and a gold lacquer thing, and I was lucky enough to get one of these. There was two that came into Barrett's of Manchester, and I went along with Stuart, and Stuart got one for the Halley, although I don't think he ever played it, to be honest. And I got one of the others. And so, of course, I turned up at the band, and you can imagine what it's like. There's nobody else on a lacquered instrument. So I've got this 19-inch bell, and it's shiny. And they're all giving me, you can imagine the comments I'm getting from the band. And anyway, I was waiting for Alex to say something, and typical Alex, an hour went by, an hour and a half. And then at one point he stopped, and then he just sort of said, we go over this bit. He said, Mr. Tuba. And that was my nickname then from Alex. Mr. Tuba, yeah. But he, again, a phenomenal musician, and very, very different times, but really, really lucky to have that experience, with some of those guys there.
Sorry, if I remember right, Phil, you saw CWS right through to their farewell concert, didn't you? I've got a recording of it at Dob Cross.
That's right. I mean, I won't go into a lot of details because it was a very, very painful end to the band. And I was heavily involved with others, and Derek Garside in particular. And it was really hard to take that the company had decided that they were going to stop the sponsorship of the band after 100 and odd years, just over 100 years, and so we tried to keep the band together, and it became the City of Manchester band eventually. And we got the deal with the Manchester City Council because we wanted to keep the band in Manchester. But it took an awful long time, and in fact, although we signed off on having a band room that we were going to use, we spent a lot of time being pretty nomadic. We rehearsed in the town hall at times. One of my other bands I was conducting, we used their band room in Manchester. But yeah, it is really, really sad. And of course, they did eventually get a new band room, strange enough, in Bellevue, opposite where the old registry offices used to be. If you remember, that we used to pop in. But I didn't actually get that far. I didn't get to, because just after Derek had left the band and various other things, I then got the opportunity to come and play with Dyke. And so we did the British Open once as the City of Manchester band. But again, we didn't have a full set of instruments until the Thursday night before. Because that's how tight it was. So there's a whole different story about that. But it was a really, really sad time. But and a couple of years after that, a few years after, I did go back and I did conduct a rehearsal there. But of course, unfortunately, the people still trying very hard. But when you've got a brand new band and you've nothing on the wall, the old Court band room was full of trophies, as all band rooms are, memorabilia. We didn't have any of that. And so it was very, very difficult, to get any, you've got to establish yourself all over again. So they hung together for quite a long time, and again, a lot of people tried really, really hard. And, there were, again, some really, really good players who stayed with that band. But sadly, of course, it's no longer in existence.
It's very sad, Phil. There's some fabulous recordings kicking about, though. I mean, they're one of my go-to bands when I hear an old test piece. How did Co-op play it? And I always try and search them out. He was quite wispish with his tempos, was Alex, wasn't he? But he was fabulous readings of some real old standards. It was fascinating. So, how did you come to get to Black Dyke? Was it the old story helping out, or did you?
Whilst I was at college, obviously, I was doing a fair bit of orchestral playing, and I thought that was the way I was going to go. Mm-hmm. But obviously, I was still playing the co-op all the way through, and I'd started doing a bit of conducting. And strangely, it was actually Jeffrey Brand who got me interested in conducting while I was with the youth band. But then when I came to Manchester, Derek Garside was, say, principal cornet of the band and sort of resident. But he was conducting another band in Manchester called Cheetham Hill Band. And a very famous old name. They'd been national champions. And then when Derek was appointed as sort of full-time conductor, Cheetham needed a conductor, and so I took over from him.
Right.
And so I had an approach from Dyke in late 70s, and I didn't do anything about it because at that time I just thought that, the route through the orchestra was going to be the way. And then, of course, as we know, at the end of the 70s, the country wasn't in a great state, and being a freelance tuba player was a pretty precarious occupation. Yeah. And I was doing pretty well, but there was as things move on, you've got to get some, a bit more stable employment. And I carried on freelancing for a long time, but then started doing some teaching. And as the co-op was, it's sort of gone, we've become City of Manchester. I have to say that I got pretty disenchanted with playing because I didn't think I was playing very well. At that time, I was sort of treasurer, secretary, occasional bandmaster, sometimes the only bass player in the section. And I was getting, so many issues. And I was sitting down at sort of a minute to 7:30 to start rehearsal, not warmed up and not playing very well. And then, right out of the blue, in the sort of middle of 85, I think it was, I got asked if I'd go and do a concert with Black Dyke. And I said yes, and I went along, and I was just absolutely blown away. It was absolutely, I thought, wow, this is what you want. And it sort of reinvigorated me. It's sort of where I wasn't thinking, so my playing was at a really good standard. I suddenly realised that that's something I wanted to do. And so from that, I got invited for another concert, and then they said, would you come and join us? And so then it was a pretty long conversation with Jackie, my wife, because obviously the schedule of Dyke was completely different to what we were doing in the City of Manchester.
Yeah.
But like she said, it's taken them nearly 10 years to ask you the second time, and they won't ask you. They won't ask you again. So I said I'd go and do 12 months. Because of all the stuff that'd been going on with the old CWS and City of Manchester band, I just wanted to go and play. And
you look back for playing again, so to speak.
Yeah, didn't want to get involved in anything else. And like I said, I thought I'd go and do 1 year. And it turned out a little bit longer than that.
How many years in total has it been, Phil, out of interest?
39, I think. Yeah.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
So, of course, Sandy will have been in the band already then.
Of course, yeah.
I joined late 87, I think it was. 88, I can't remember. But, it was great. So how did you get on with Jacko when you first met him?
Yeah, well, I loved Jacko. It's funny. It's strange, isn't it? Like I say, I crossed swords a bit with Joe Poole, talking about those years ago. And I remember I'd been in the band very long, and I thought I was doing okay. At one point in rehearsal, Derek threw his instrument on the floor, and he peered at me with those half-rimmed blue tinted glasses and said, "What the heck was that?" Not quite as polite as that. "You don't play like that here, boy." Oh, right, okay. But I have to say, after that, we did get on pretty well. But as we know, Derek wasn't always the most subtle of people in giving advice.
When you got to know him, he was an absolute gentleman, but he just had a way. I think it was his winning ways in the band. He just wanted everything perfection.
They just all had that attitude, though, didn't they? I mean, that's...
It wasn't just Derek, were they? The whole band had the same attitude.
No, they were just... And as you joined, you were sort of indoctrinated with it all, and the way to think, and what was expected, and etc. etc. And there were no prisoners. There were no prisoners taken at all.
No, there absolutely wasn't. And you had to, if you didn't buy into that, then you didn't last in the band. That was the point. It was that total belief in what you wanted and to be at the best at everything you did all the time. Yeah. And I think that's something that I've always been, from those days, all the time I've been at Dyke, that's what I've always been trying to instill in any new member that comes in as well. Yeah. But like you said, Derek was, I did get on well with him. It's funny with my daughter, Rebecca, when we did a tour of Australia, was it 88? Was it something like that?
Phil, yeah.
88. Yeah. And when I come back, I bought this koala bear or whatever, it's a soft toy, and she called it Jacko, and he absolutely loved that, And so yeah, we had some fabulous times, as all three of us have, haven't we? Got great memories of all those times. But like you say, it was a tough environment, and certainly from what I come from.
Simon and I talk regular about things, and that's one of the things we say. What would Jacko say? What would Jacko think? Or when you just think about the way that we went about things, some of it was horrifically hard.
It was a bit primal, wasn't it? Really, it was a bit.
And it was successful. But you think back, and it was. Yeah, it was just absolutely all or nothing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that stuck with me, somebody said, a winning band can't be a happy band. You've got to be falling out all the time to be successful. And at the time you go along with that, the more you look back on it, you think, come on, we've got to enjoy it as well.
I remember Poggy, he once said to me, he says, band's far too happy. We need to set something going.
That's right.
What are you on about?
Exactly. And just, whenever things were going really well, then, somebody throw a little hand grenade in, and where we go. But it was just the way, and it's like I said, we've all been lucky in what we've done, and I count myself lucky to have been part at the back end of, if you like, the previous generation, the early 70s of bands, how it was, then the style in which we played, and so on, and then obviously getting into Dyke, in the 80s, and almost being part again of the next generation, part of the old generation and into the new generation, and how you start going about it. I think, though, that the biggest thing for all of us, what we all have a pride in what we do. We want to be the best at what we do, and I think how we go about that, and certainly conductors have a big part of course, their attitude and how they handle players and what have you is a big part of that too. But I think it is that pride that you want. You've got to have that to keep the standard. Because if you're going to be successful, then you've got to have standards, and it's not only just your own personal standard, because you've got to be good enough to do the job that's been asked of you. But there's also, I think, as we're more experienced people and players, you've also got to help the younger players coming in because perhaps they haven't got that knowledge or that experience.
Yeah, I bet it's been really interesting, hasn't it, seeing Black Dyke develop over quite a few, 3 decades, nearly 4.
Quite a few incarnations. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is strange, and you know what it's like. People always say, "Oh, who's your favourite conductor or whatever," and of course that doesn't really come into it because every one of those conductors is unique.
Absolutely,
And all of them, and it's not just the Black Dyke; it's the bands too. But we're talking about Dyke. I'm looking in the conductors that I've worked with there, and each and every one of them has helped me, not only as a player, but as a musician in general, and also, following on, from conducting as well. And so you take something from each of them, but each of them are all, phenomenally talented with what they did,
Yeah.
I think back to my days in the youth band, Scottish youth band. Jeffrey Brand was the conductor, and he was the first sort of real eye opener of a major musician sort of thing in front of me. And at the time, you sort of take it for granted, but you look back and you think how special was that to learn from someone like that who kept coming back. I mean, Phil, remember when we were at Dyke, used to do all those Kenwood Bowl concerts for English Heritage, and he would be in charge of them, and so I saw him as a youngster when I was a teenager.
We always looked forward to it, didn't we?
Yeah, but he was fabulous. He was a huge name in banding, and we were getting sporadic bits of him from the youth band, and then when he came to Dyke and did those specials, they were always sort of project concerts, weren't they? Big stuff, big repertoire, classy stuff, and we were just dead lucky,
Yeah, and like I say, I mean, like those Kenwood Ball, and like I said, we actually premiered English Heritage there with Jeffrey.
Yeah.
But like I said, earlier on, he was a huge influence, and how things come round in circles because, like I say, my introduction to him as a player, and then he got me interested in conducting because he was doing a conducting course on the youth band. And then later, of course, I became a tutor at the National Youth Band. Yeah. And then Jeffrey said, "Oh, you ought to be on the council," as it was called then. And so that was another part of that. And so I always remember he said to me, "We need some young blood." And I'm thinking, I think by this time I was about 50, thinking.
That is young.
But he was, and he always had that fantastic twinkle, didn't he? The eyes.
He did.
Yeah, and he told great stories. Yeah, he made the music come alive, and it's something I try and do. You try and tell a story with the music, and then later, of course, the Black Dyke connection. For me to be able to be at Dyke and get to conduct them, and that links in with Jeffrey as well. But like you say, we sometimes forget just how lucky we were with that, and at the times you don't always maybe appreciate it.
You take it for granted, don't you?
Yeah, and so we've been really lucky with all of the conductors we've had, and not just the principal conductors at Dyke, all the other people that come along and guest conductors and so on.
Guys, do you remember when we did a concert in Holland? I think it was Rotterdam, and that guy called Hans Friesen conducted.
Yeah, that was
mesmerised me.
European, wasn't it?
Absolutely mesmerised me. He did.
Yeah,
it was
and
wonderful.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's not just maybe people are listening to this as household names, but for us, the people we work with who, in other countries, are just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
and it's those opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been helping Nick out with a bit of conducting at Black Dyke as well. That must be a massive thrill for you.
It's strange. I hadn't realised this, that because I'd taken the odd rehearsal at Dyke from time to time when it needed to happen, but it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't in my. Well, I didn't think I'd be doing that all the time. And then, I think it was last year, year before, they presented me with a nice glass thing celebrating my 20th year as bandmaster.
Wow.
So it is, and I've never. I mean, it's a fantastic privilege, and it's equal parts exciting and scary. Because and Sandy, I've been, I did, I've actually conducted you. I think we've been playing solos in the band. And and when you've got people that, we talk about, we use this word legend, but I mean, you are legends, and so to actually stand in front of it and try and wag your arms and make some sort of sense. But I think it's worked really well over the years because obviously I know what Nick wants. I know the repertoire. We always have a joke in that I very, very rarely got a rehearsal for a concert. We used to do the concerts, as the band always gets there early, and we'd have 40 minutes or so before, and that would be my rehearsal for that night's concert. But because I knew the stuff, and the band were always, full of great musicians, and so providing you don't do anything really stupid, then we're going to get along. And but it was a fantastic privilege, and like I say, you're always conscious when you go out that what you're actually representing, because the expectation level, from the audience and anyone listening, as we know, is absolutely sky high. And so, you always want to go and I've always wanted to. I see the conductor as a sort of the interface between the audience and the band. Sometimes the band can be on stage and there's no connection with the audience at all. They're playing fantastic, and the audience are appreciative. But I've always wanted to try and get the two things together, and I think that's something that some of the conductors, Nick in particular, I think does really well. And so again, we talk about learning things, and that's something that you pick up and try and you're not going to copy, but you it's something that you think, how does that work? Yeah, it was really good. And what did I do? Yeah, I could do that better. Or yeah, that was okay. It really tests you, of course, as well.
Yeah.
Because when you're working with the band, you've got to be making sure you know your stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Phil, you're on about every time the band goes out. And Simon, I think we've probably talked about this before as well. That I remember years ago, it's not just about winning a contest, is it? I've heard people say, "Oh, we always knew we were national champion material and all that." Well, to me, it's not about winning the contest, once or twice or whatever. It's about going out on that wet February Saturday night to Whitby, like you've done with the band, and we've all done it, and still the expectation of the audience is to hear whichever band it is at the top of the game, and it's doing that on the. I mean, how many hours have we spent on buses together? Over the years, going to
all those games.
Yeah. You see, where were you this weekend? Got to say, I can't remember. You just got on the bus and went, and then got off and did it, But it is that doing it week in, week out for a long, long time. The commitment is scary. I mean, some of the people I have always been most impressed with when I did my second stint playing at the band is people like Gary Reid, trombone player, and Joe Cook when Joe was still living in England, travelling down from the northeast every rehearsal to Queensbury. Yeah. And for years and years and years, and still doing it. Gary's still doing it. And you think these are the guys that you think, what the commitment that's needed to play at that level in a band like that, and all the gigs and everything else is just phenomenal.
Funny
Yes,
enough, I was working in Newcastle yesterday, and I'm driving down the A19, thinking this must be where, likes of Gary,
Yeah, yeah.
Steve Malton, all coming to play with West Yorkshire bands. How
yeah,
have they done this? It
and
felt
because
like a never-ending journey.
yeah, and I think that's the other thing as well. I mean, there's Keith Brickcliffe, who's
Yeah, yeah.
again in Leicester area. The amount of miles that they do is phenomenal. And of course, it's strange, isn't it? Because I think sometimes audiences they turn up at a concert hall and they just sort of think the band is just there,
Yeah,
and they don't know that you've been 5 hours on a coach. To get there, then you do your concert, then you've got 5 hours back, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
the next day, the other part of the country. And I think that is the hardest part of banding. The playing bit is where we get the enjoyment. We love it,
yeah,
but you've got to have that commitment. Like you say, it's not turning it on just for what we might call a special job or a
Yeah,
contest.
the big event. Yeah,
It is every job because
yeah,
every time you go out, I always look at it like this: there's going to be people in that audience who've never ever heard the band before, and so you've got to put on that show,
yeah,
yeah,
and because you want them to come back again,
yeah,
and I think that's what I was saying before about. I think the audience want to see the band enjoying it, and you want to be able to feel that from the band to the audience, and then the audience feed it back to the band, and of course then we feel good, and it just lifts us all, and you forget then, yeah, it is a very drizzly night wherever, but in that sense you want every concert to be special, and it
yeah.
doesn't matter how many times you played that piece of music, you've got to try and make it sound like the first time.
Phil, you've had such a long longevity of a career in a top band, the top band, as far as I'm concerned, and you've also been at grassroots level for the same time. Now that takes some huge commitment on your behalf and your wife, Jackie. Um, how have you managed to do the two together? And it's at different spectrums, isn't it?
It is, and again, it's strange, isn't it? I talked right at the beginning about how things go around, and there's a sort of there's sort of circles that all connect. I mentioned before I've been doing some conducting in Manchester and bands there, and I had Cheetah Mill Band, and then I had the fabulously named Miles Platting Baptist Mission Band. And I tell you, we could spend the whole night talking about characters in that band. And you talk about apprenticeships, and this is what Simon drew again particularly. But after one of my first real, or it was probably the first week, one of the older members of the band came to us and says, "Whatever you do, don't upset the B flat bass player." I said, "Oh, why is that?" He says the last conductor said something to him and he threw his bass at him.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so yeah, so I was conducting Miles Platting Baptist Mission Band down in Manchester, and then out of the blue, I got a call to say would I go and take a rehearsal at a band called Delph. Well, I'd never heard of Delph and hadn't a clue what it was, but I said, okay, I'll go along. And anyway, it was in Saddleworth, I found out, and I made the trek up there. And I went to take them, and they were rehearsing for the national finals, fourth section. And after the rehearsal, they came and said, would I take them to the contest? And I said, yes. And I went along, and we went down to London, and 1980 they became national champions for section of Great Britain. So, obviously a fantastic achievement. And it was the first time a band in Saddleworth, let alone Delph, had actually won a national title.
Brilliant.
And so I went just to do that one job, and that was in 1980. And I'm still there. Um, and the thing was that I inherited a pretty young band at that time, and a lot of youth band members. I got some older players as well, but predominantly a younger band. And so I think we were managed. We managed to work together. There was a lot of issues with them initially. It took me a while to realise that most of the stuff they played, because I thought they played pretty well, but as soon as I put any new music in front of them, they couldn't play it.
Okay.
And they'd actually learned everything sort of parrot fashion. They'd been taught each of the parts. And so I just said, we aren't going to do that. We are going to learn how to, and so I just kept getting pieces out every rehearsal, 5 or 6 pieces, just play through them, hand them back in, another 5 or 6, hand them back in. And, that was how we sort of got around it. But what I'm really, really pleased that there's still players in that band from 1980 who are still there now. And, you talked before about how do you fit it in? You've got to have a very understanding family, wife.
Absolutely.
Jackie obviously plays at Delph, and then later Rebecca, my daughter, she came and played as well. And so they've always been part of that. And that's the other great thing about, village bands. I think, it's the family connections.
Yeah. And
I sort of got into the way of life. And so I was living down in Manchester at that point, and we moved up into Saddleworth area. And, it becomes part of your life. But it was pretty difficult, as you alluded to, Simon, I had Dyke on Monday and Thursday and Delph on a Wednesday and a Friday.
Yeah. Phil, you mentioned there about the band Delph initially sort of learning parrot fashion, and you had to just keep chucking music at them and then handing it in and all this. I would be very interested to know from someone as experienced as you about what you think the key ingredients are to get success, continued, lasting success at that sort of level and working up through the sections. I mean, it's a different sort of mentality than a Black Dyke. But do you think there are key ingredients to keep it for a band of that sort of standard to keep them motivated and committed and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the fundamentals are the same, in that you try and give them advice in playing, but mainly about breathing, so we can start playing in time. How do we create a good sound? How do we play in tune? How do we get good dynamic contrast? How do we work style into this? How do we give players the tools, if you like, to become a little bit better? And how do we approach the music? And I think the important thing is that, you said before, we all know that not every rehearsal is going to be perfect. There are times when things aren't going quite as you want. But I think you've got to have something that makes the players want to come back next week. And I think, it's that balance of having good repertoire, trying to keep it varied, but also giving them... it could be, we play a lot of hymn tunes and trying to make them more aware of not just their own playing, but how do they fit within the band? Where does their part fit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where they play, who's playing that line with you? Are you playing the same note? Are you in octaves? Are you in harmony? And okay, that's sometimes a bit of a stretch at first, but it's that awareness so that they become, I talk about playing in a box. So many players only play within an 18-inch circumference of themselves. They don't listen across the band. They don't
that's very,
understand
very
who's
true.
playing. And so I think it's those fundamentals, that, like we say, at the higher level, it's still what we're doing, but those players will perhaps have more experience of it. But I think it's also giving encouragement, it's support, not just standing in front of a band and telling them how rubbish they are. It's that's the easiest thing, isn't it, as a conductor? Stand up in front of them and say, yeah, it's rubbish again. No, it's still rubbish again. Now, as a player, I want to put my hand up and say, tell me what I've got to do.
Yeah.
Not just keep telling them that they're rubbish. I remember, again, we talk about conductors, Jim Watson, he used to have an analogy, and he used to talk about, you get a new dog, a puppy, and it's all happy and running up to you. And if every time you run up to it, you hit it round the head, eventually it'll stop coming to you.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the band. Yeah. And if you just keep on telling a band that they're no good, without giving them advice on how to get better, then why should they keep turning up? But I think the other aspect, the one thing that really pleases me with Delph, we've always gone to contests with our own band.
Yeah.
And the band know that I'm not going to be asking a player to sit out while I bring someone in and then get that player to come back. We go with that band. And I think that's where there's an element of trust. And I love the social side of what we do, because you want everyone to be taking part in everything, not just the playing of the band, it's everything goes with it. As you know, we have our own band club there.
Yeah.
So that's great. And we have all the village events, and obviously Whit Friday's huge, but it's not just that, it's all the things we can be involved in the village. And so, it's part of that community. And so that's something I think, once I sort of settled in there, that was what I wanted to try and create. So it's part of the village life. The village can be proud of what the band's achieved, because they won another national title in 2010. So that's 2 national titles for a tiny village band. Yeah, and and plus other things along the way. But as we said, it's not only about the contest. It's what you do. But that is a significant. It's something that not just myself, but the band and the village should be really, really proud of, because and again, most of those people that were in 2010, a lot of them actually were there in 1980, and I've still got players from 2010. Now they've done 40 years as well.
See, I think it's quite obvious that Delph Band has a very strong connection with the locality, with the village, with the area. I think that's the thing that a lot of bands could do. I think the more are maybe doing it now, because it is getting harder and harder for bands to, we know how much bands are struggling to keep going in the current climate, but having a strong identity within your own local community, it means a hell of a lot, doesn't it?
It does. And as I say, that's something that I thought, when I first went there, I wasn't aware of all this, and maybe, there wasn't such a connection. But that's something that we wanted to generate and keep going. And incidentally, this year is the band's 175th anniversary.
Right.
Although, so again, we're planning things that we want to do, and a lot of that will be centered around the village too.
Great stuff.
Because and carrying it forward, we've got a really active and thriving youth band. And we've got a training band as well, and some absolute beginners who absolutely love the Delph tutors. And a lot of those, of course, are sort of children of people who play in the band. And so it's the next generation, and keeping all that going.
So you've set up your own conveyor belt of players, essentially.
Yeah, and you're really lucky that the guy who takes the youth band is absolutely fantastic, and all the help and support they got. Last year was their 50th anniversary.
Wow!
Right.
And currently in the senior band, I've got 2 of those founder members who are still playing.
Wow.
So that to me is what's important. But it has been tricky, jostling things around, because after sort of freelancing a long time, I got into, I was doing some instrumental teaching. And then I don't quite know how it happened, but I ended up as head of music in grammar school in Manchester.
Yeah, I remember.
And so I did that for quite a lot of years, and so it was pretty full on, with what we're doing. And I say, without the family support, then it just would not have been possible. No. But they are. It was at times you've got to juggle things, and Christmas got very busy. School concerts, Dyke concerts, Delph concerts, and sometimes I couldn't do obviously everything. So you've got to have some help as well. But and it is strange because, like I said, I went thinking I'd do one event there, and here we are 45 years later. And same with Dyke. I thought I'd go and do 1 year. I almost got to the 40th year, but health didn't help at that end, and so but it's still good to the band are very supportive and helped me an awful lot in the last 12-18 months when I haven't been so well, but going along to band and meeting up with them, tremendously supportive. And again, I think that's good. And I think that's maybe one of the other things that has changed a little bit, that again, look, we remember we're talking about family and stuff, and we remember when we were, the 80s Dyke, we wouldn't allow people to come on the coach. We
had two separate coaches.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when we went to the likes of the Albert Hall or whatever, we had a bus for the band, and all the wives and girlfriends and everything else went on to the other coach.
Absolutely,
it's bonkers, really, wasn't it, when you think back?
Yeah, absolutely crazy. And I remember Jackie telling me we'd gone to Switzerland. It may have been for European Lucerne or concert, not sure. And Major was conducting, and we got to the airport. We come off the plane, and Jackie was coming, and Rebecca was with me. I think Rebecca would be about 3 or 4. And so, of course, we got off the plane, got into the coach, and we all piled on. And the Major's wife, Birgit, was there, and Jackie, and says, "What's happening now?" And Jackie says, "Well, we'll make our way, we'll get the train or whatever into the city centre." Wow. And of course, she stormed out and said, "Peter, come here." And I remember us having to have a vote, in the band to allow them to travel on the coach with us, And looking back now, it does seem so strange, doesn't it? But
it does.
So I think the fact now that you're welcoming your family to be part of the band, and you want that support, and it's just really strange to say that just came to me there when I was thinking about that. All of those little things that used to happen, which we thought were normal.
We did, because we were always told, it was always drummed into you, and I remember saying this, that going to a contest was a job of work for us.
Yeah.
Even the London weekend, it was never about the socialising or the meeting people or anything. It was a job of work. Yeah. We were there to do one thing and one thing only.
Yeah.
And that was
total
it.
Focus.
Total focus. And if we were not successful, which meant second, was not successful. If you were second, disaster.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Very early in my own tenure at Black Dyke, I had a job in Leeds working for quite a big company. I was paid quite well. And they used to do exhibitions. And they said to me the week before London, I think it got to the Tuesday, "Can you nip home, get your passport and your bag? We need you to go to Germany to do some work out there." And I went, I can't do anything this week. "Why is that?" "Because I play in a band and we're playing at the Albert Hall and there's 20-odd guys. I can't let them down." "Well, it's your job or your band." I said, "Well, it's the band then." And I walked home with my toolbox, and my mum was horrified, and she was like, "What on earth have you done?"
Yeah. And it was, wasn't it? The old joke was, about missing rehearsals. It just you didn't miss.
It just didn't.
But again, on the other side of that, of course, it created enormous friction, I guess, at homes and what have you. And maybe, we've moved on a little bit from that, where we have to be a bit more realistic. And, yes, you can still be as focused, but we have to take we all know banding has changed considerably. And, we can't go back to those days. And, people's jobs are different, everything about it. Yeah. And so
it does make it harder. Yeah.
And so, we still want to have the same drive. We still want to have, to aim for the same excellence. But there has to be sometimes a little bit more flexibility, I think, than we certainly experienced at the beginning.
I just would not entertain going back to them days. It's just, I used to just laugh at myself thinking, really, is this what we do? Yeah. We're just excluding people really close to us, and it was weird.
Yeah, my dad never really understood what I was doing. Me going off to music college, for example, he just thought it was some women. I'd go back home and work, with him in local TV and radio shop and whatever. And then we're doing the band, and it'd say, where are you going? What are you doing? And I'd say, well, we're going down to, or going up to Glasgow or whatever, and come back. And how many hours is that? And I said, well, probably about 12 hours or whatever. It's a concert, And he said, and you get paid? And I said, well, it'd be about £2, I suppose, or whatever it was, for that.
Yeah.
And he never, ever got it, And one of the nicest things I managed to do was my hall, the concert hall, was the Victoria Hall in Hanley. That's where all my, grew up. It's a fantastic hall, and that's where the orchestra was and what have you, and Dyke were there. And a few years ago, Dyke were playing there, and I was conducting, and my dad was in the audience, and because he had taken me along to some orchestral concerts there when I was young, and listening to the odd band. And I managed to dedicate a piece to him as well. So I think it sort of came around full circle. I think he started to get it a little bit then, But yeah, he never really, like you say, you're doing what?
Yeah.
What?
My family have never got it. They've never understood it really. No. And they look at you puzzled when you tell them about the commitment that you've got to give.
Phil, we know, banding has changed certainly, and there are lots of different issues at the minute in banding. Is there anything in particular you think is more important, or trying to fix things or change things? Is there, and I'm not thinking of the sort of Black Dyke level. I'm thinking generally in banding. Anything you think is needs looking at quite drastically?
I think as we said, we know bands are struggling, and I think particularly around contests, I think we've got to look at how we can help bands to get to contests. And I'm definitely against certainly elite level of having open registration or anything like that. But I do think at say regional levels, and I know it has changed this year for fourth and third section in terms of being able to borrow. But I wonder whether or not, like I said, I'm lucky, and I've got a really good youth band now, and we played at Ares here, and I had 6 players in the youth band come in. But equally, I've probably got 3 or 4 who I would have liked to have been able to play.
Okay.
But I'm limited by 25. And I wonder whether or not, so the 2 things I'm looking at, I guess, is one, do we extend the idea of being able to borrow players up to, say, second section, not just a fourth and third? And also, do we look at the numbers and say, like in most European countries, you can play up to 30? Now, I'm not saying that you have to play 30, but that flexibility, because I think there's 2 problems. We do have bands that aren't going to contests because they're thinking we've only got 18 players, and we can't do it because we can't borrow. And and like I say, I'm not talking about wholesale, right across the board, unlimited borrows or anything like that. But I do think we can be more flexible. And equally for the bands, particularly low section bands that maybe have got a lot of younger players. And sometimes you see, I've done it myself when I might have 6 percussionists. It's just so I can get them on stage, so they've got some experience of being able to play. They might only have to hit a triangle a couple of times, but it's the only way. It's the only way I can get them on stage. So maybe a little bit more flexibility about what we do. Which, like we say, we look at Europe. Whether the I'm lucky. I go to Norway regularly and conduct over there, and I can field almost as many as I want there. Same in Switzerland and other European, banding nations, where again they play 30 or 35. And like I said,
we've got to encourage participation. That's for sure. Absolutely, it's a no-brainer for me. It's actually harder to get a band playing with bigger numbers.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
you're not actually gaining anything, are you? But you're letting people participate.
You're gaining the experience that Phil's saying about blooding these young players. But if you're thinking as an adjudicator, if you've got, instead of 25 slightly inexperienced players or less skilled, let's put it that way, if you suddenly add another 10 onto that, you're sort of compounding the difficulties of keeping them in tune and keeping them together and all that. So there are pros and cons. But trying to keep people. I mean, we've spoken to lots of people about how do you keep people interested, and again, if they're not doing the things that the band is doing, if you're excluding them from that, then they'll just decide that what they're like these days. I mean, we see it in school, don't we? They have the attention spans are a bit sometimes. And if they're not getting the opportunities to play in that, they'll just go and do something else.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And I'm not advocating to say that you have to play that number. This is flexibility, I think. And, it's just my own experience, with what I have now, that it certainly, for me able to play one extra horn, one extra trombone, another back row, then I think that benefits them and my band in the long term. And so, it's just being able to have that. I agree that, there's nothing worse than having 6 trombones or, 6 tubas on a contest or whatever, because, it does become a bit counterproductive with the issues you have. But it's just having maybe that flexibility in being, not quite so rigid like that. And you'll see whether it encourages or enables more bands to be able to participate. If we look at some of the area numbers, and certainly last year, certain regions, they really were low. And you think,
I think that's going to be the same this time as well, isn't it? You look at some of them and you think, and you hear stories of, in the 4 section in our area, 25 years ago there was 30 bands. Now we're down to 16.
Yeah, and single numbers, and it's not just as simple as that. We know the finance comes into it, and there's also then the issue of travelling for some of the larger regionals. Someone if they want the top end of the region and have got to travel down to the bottom end, it's an awful lot of expense. And if they think we haven't got a full band, and I can't do anything about it, then I think they're going to cut their losses. And it's a real shame. It's where that goes forward. But and as I say, I think it's a very positive move this year to tweak those rules to allow trail to borrow. And also, I think the other one that was changed, which I think was significant, is being again. I'm only looking at this for lower section bands. I'm not advocating for the top section, where again a player can play in more than one area. It would make sense for me if I needed, I don't know, a trombone player, and we're where we are in Saddleworth, obviously, big debate whether or not we're in Yorkshire or Lancashire.
Don't get Gilbert going on that one.
So you can nip across the hill here into Holmfirth and borrow a player. Yeah. from the auction.
That's right. And surely it's from the same section. They know the piece, and so that I think is positive. And like I say, I know we've all talked a lot about bands bringing ringers in and what have you, and the top section. Look, I think we've been an elite band in all our lives, and we want to go with our team, because that's what you're racing for. And sometimes there may be a medical reason or something that crops along, and you want to be able to cover that. But I think there's a difference in doing that to sort of save that performance rather than going out to bring players in to make the performance. And I think that's the big difference. For that. But again, bands run in different ways. I'm a traditionalist, and I think championship section should be that.
I think that way it retains and we know there's a huge sport element to this. We always went with our own team. We never brought people in. It was never a thing, and I would like to retain a bit of that where it's, it's at the very top end. It's one band competing against another, like you say, ringers from other places and things.
Yeah. So, and I'd say for me, the flexibility needs to be there to encourage and help lower section bands, and not open the floodgates more, so that what we're talking about actually just explodes even more. And I think there has been moves, hasn't there, with some registration rules that are changing to try and do that. But like we said, banding's changed.
It has.
We're in the.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
No, I'm going to say it. Yeah, we're of that age.
Phil, it's been absolutely fascinating to listen to you this evening. I would have thought our listeners will enjoy it from all spectrums of banding. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. We'd love to have you on again, one time, and, because we've plenty of subjects we could talk about. So on behalf of myself and Sandy, Phil, thank you for coming along and sharing your experiences. You are a true legend of brass banding in absolutely every sphere. And we wish you well and everything. So if any of our listeners want to bring any comments in for me and Sandy to discuss, please email us at smithandgrezzy@gmail.com. The and is spelt out, A-N-D, smithandgrezzy@gmail.com. So for this podcast, that's enough from us, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.